What a privilege and a joy it is to be here and speak to some themes that are so vital to Catholic rural life. I consider you one of my best friends, and not just simply for the opportunity to work together, but to learn how to be Catholic men of faith and live our Catholic life together. I'm extremely indebted. You've taught me, I'm sure, more than I've taught you. Esteemed colleague, is that I think you used the phrase in the introduction, esteemed colleague. So you can imagine my consternation last week when I was talking to my dear friend. Jim, it's the anniversary of Catholic Rural, 100 years. That's no small milestone. And you have before referred to me as an esteemed colleague. Maybe a little gift to one of your esteemed colleagues would be appropriate, I would think. We've been 18 years working in the trenches, and anniversary. Sure, Chris, he says, what do you got in mind? Well, Jim, I was thinking I want something silver and sleek and go from 0 to 210 seconds or less. Right? He says, I think I know. I think I got something. And he came back with a bathroom scale. I mean, so yeah. So thank you for our friendship. What a privilege to serve here in this capacity. I've been dean at St. Paul Seminary for a long time, and the fruit that has come from our common work has just been extraordinary. So I want to take some time this afternoon to share with you some of the work we're doing here in Catholic rural life. Let's start with a poem here. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brinded cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire cold chestnut falls, finches' wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow, and plow. And all trades, their gear, their tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange. Whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle dim. He fathers forth, whose beauty is past change. Praise him. The Jesuit priest Gerard Manley Hopkins penned these lines at the end of the 19th century when his beloved English rural countryside that gave such glory to his God was becoming increasingly beclouded under the darkness of industrialization. I think my introduction to Catholic rural life came through teaching here at the University of St. Thomas such poems with my students. There's a famous one that opens with a line about a kingfisher some of you may be familiar with. And felt like I was doing pretty well in the classroom, and a hand shoots up in the back, and I've touched a soul, I can tell. Yes, what's your question? What's a kingfisher? The student asked. I gathered myself and answered as best I could. The next day, we were reading a poem about Benzie poplars, aspen trees of Hopkins, a beautiful poem. And there another hand shoots up. Well, this time I know I've hit pay dirt. I'm certain I'm teaching them. What's an aspen tree? The student asked. Now, I want to be very clear from the beginning. I've loved my students over the years. I have the best and the brightest young people in my classes and now at the seminary. And I couldn't be more grateful for the opportunity to teach such fine young people. But I was starting to wonder what's going on here. These allusions to nature seem to be a little bit of a challenge for these students. So we rented a van and went out to Southwest Minnesota and visited some farms. I wanted to introduce them into all things rural and get exposure to some of the issues we might be talking about in class. At the end of the retreat, we called it, I asked students for some feedback, and a student wrote, I didn't know they raised animals in Minnesota at the retreat. Now, in fairness to her, she was from California. She got on a plane. She flew to St. Paul Airport. And if you did too, you probably drove up one of the most beautiful roads in the United States from the airport to here. And you would come to the most beautiful campus in the central United States. And I think if this were your exposure to Minnesota, you too would wonder if they raised animals in Minnesota. But other questions I've gotten over the years. I have rain barrels in my backyard. For a while there, it looked like a meth lab as we were sort of collecting rain. I kind of went overboard. I've dialed it back considerably. And the neighbor said, "Is it safe to put rainwater on your garden?" I said, "Well, God does. I think it's okay." And we were tapping trees from, tapping maple trees for syrup one spring. And someone said, "I heard that sap from trees is poisonous." Hmm, hmm, hmm. And then one of my favorite questions I got in over the years, what does the artichoke animal look like? The recipe had called for artichoke hearts, and she had called me. Yeah. And she had admitted that she had never seen this elusive animal. Okay, so now we've all been there. We've all asked the question that kind of reveals our naivete about various elements of nature. As those of you who are on the farm, you get these questions from the city slickers all the time, right? And we've all experienced a certain gap in our knowledge of nature, so it's fun to laugh about. But you do have to start to wonder what is going on here, and if there's maybe some bigger questions we need to reflect on. The Oxford Junior Dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary for Children, under pressure, had to reveal the list of words that they deleted from the dictionary, believing them no longer to be relevant to modern day childhood. Under pressure, the university press revealed a list of entries that it no longer felt to be relevant. The deletions included acorn, adder, ash, beech, bluebell, cygnet, dandelion, fern, hazel, heather, heron, ivy, kingfisher, lark, mistletoe, nectar, newt, otter, pasture, and willow, deleted from the new edition of the dictionary. The words introduced to the new edition included attachment, block graph, blog, broadband, bullet point, celebrity, chat room, committee, cut and paste, and MP3 player, and voicemail. So you can see maybe there's a concern here. A nature deficit disorder is how Richard Louv puts it, where increasingly we're getting distant further and further and further from the natural order. Our work in Catholic rural life is constantly challenging the blind spots that creep in all of our imaginations. The blind spot of the person that says, "I live in the city. Rural life is not my particular concern." Mr. Ennis and I teach a course with our seminarians in rural ministry practicum every summer. And many of our seminarians are coming from large urban areas. And so they usually, about this time of year, start stopping by my office wondering how they can get out of the seminar and do something more useful with their summer, because they live in the city and they don't anticipate the need to know. Shortly after that person leaves my office, disappointed I might add, the next one will show up and explain how they live in the country already. They were raised on a farm. They don't need our summer seminar, right? And then the earnest one will show up and say, "Well, I used to live in the country, but now I'm in the city, but I'm Catholic. And I already understand the church's teachings. And I don't think the church has anything particularly to say about Catholic rural life." So one of the challenges we face in our work, in our summer seminar and in the work of Catholic rural life with the many retreats that we host, is there can be a kind of blind spot that's creeping into the Catholic imagination. And it's somewhat pervasive, frankly, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. Who needs Catholic rural life? Catholic rural life enters our community precisely at those places where we least expect the need for revelation. Like Christ himself, Catholic rural life enters in the midst of our seemingly ordinary lives and raises us to a supernatural vision and invitation to eternal friendship. Those places that we least expect the need for revelation, places that become so familiar, so mundane to us, that we take them for granted and not see what is present or who is present among us. Now, in fairness, we have some bishops here. Kudos to you. The USCCB, U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, has frequently through the years, certainly in the United States, this is just a small sample of the list, they've frequently generated really beautiful letters about the situation in rural, about the importance of rural. And this is just a small sample of some of the documents they've produced through the years, affirming the dignity of agricultural work, speaking to its challenges, and working hard to bring the revelation of Christ and his church into these communities. So it's not like there's been no effort on the part of the church to raise these concerns. And of course, let's champion Catholic rural life just for a moment. In its heyday, 1950s, 1960s, they held rural conferences, much like this, all over the country at various universities, and agronomists and liturgists and philosophers and theologians and naturalists and farmers would all gather together to discuss their Catholic faith, how it impacts our encounter in the rural situation. One of my favorite essays, maybe some of you academics will appreciate this, Descartes and the use of artificial manure, right? Got to love that as a Thomist. Descartes and the use of artificial manure. That's what artificial fertilizer was considered at the time in the early days. Descartes is a philosopher. So you saw this intersection of our intellectual and theological patrimony and the challenges of rural life. It's a beautiful legacy, and I'm proud to contribute to it. I have to say, I like to share this in stark contrast to the landscape today. Of the 244 degree-granting institutions in the United States, not one offers a program of study in agriculture. Yeah. If you want to be a lawyer, if you want to be a doctor, if you want to be a mid-level administrator, if you want to be a theologian, if you want to be a poet, a philosopher, a Catholic priest, an engineer, a biologist, a money manager, a sailor, there's a Catholic university out there for you somewhere and a degree program to form you. But if you want to be a farmer, if you want to manage vast property and vast resources, let's be honest, these are not small commitments. If you want to do it in a way that reflects your vocation as an adopted son of the Father, if you want to do it in a way that advances the common good of the community of which you find yourself a part, your farm might be older than the university itself that you might consider going to. If you want to do this, there's nothing available to you. So we can't be too surprised that there's a little bit of an inertia in the work of Catholic rural life because of this kind of blindness and occlusion that's creeping in to our Catholic imagination. And we have been working really hard in overcoming those deficits. Sometimes the work in Catholic rural can feel a bit like that in the high plains of Nebraska with a rather formidable storm coming through. I know some of you are thinking that looks like your rectory. Might cut a little too close to home there. Yes, I would put some flowers in and maybe some throw pillows to freshen up the place. You can feel like you're alone if you're working in Catholic rural life. You can feel like alone if you're a farmer out in Catholic rural setting. And I want to express empathy to the challenge. Catholic rural life there is to provide the revelation, though, to lift up hearts in the rural setting, to renew our relationship with the person of Jesus. And in no small part, we've been recently buoyed by the work of Pope Francis in Laudato Si. He has this beautiful line, rather than a problem to be solved, The world is a joyful mystery to be contemplated with gladness and praise. And speaking of the joyful mystery, the book's available on the back table if you care to read more deeply on some of these themes in the back. It's not just rhetoric for Pope Francis. He means it when he's talking about the importance of ecology. The new program of priestly formation, which is our manual to how to run seminaries all over the world, now includes a rather remarkable sentence. Seminarians, and we can include priest and lay, or priest ordained and lay, not just those training. They must be encouraged to experience an ecological conversion whereby the effects of their encounter with Jesus Christ become evident in their relationship with the world around them. Seminarians now are expected to undergo an ecological conversion. Can you believe it? I know, it's okay. We'll be okay. We'll be okay. That can be a lot of triggering going on there. You get a little nervous. I understand. But we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And here's why we're going to be okay. Because we know Jesus. We're going to be okay because we profess the person of Jesus Christ. And let me risk some catechism with the bishops in the room here. They can correct me later, I suppose. It's not, God's came down all the time. It wasn't really a shock that God's would come down and walk among the earth. If you remember your Greek mythology, gods came down in all kinds of guises. The fact that God came down and walked the earth, that in itself was not the stunner. But it's not just any God that came down. When we profess Jesus, it's the one through whom all things were made. It's not just any God that comes down in the person of Jesus. He is the one through whom all things were made. God, the Logos, the church will say. God, the incarnate Word. God, the Logos veiled in creation. The Logos meaning thought or word or reason or rationality. And so we're not indifferent to the created order because we're not indifferent to the person of Jesus. There should be a spontaneous ecological concern in your hearts because we're professing the person of Christ, the one through whom all things were made. And I know there can be tensions and there are lots of strange debates out there. But the more we pull away from those conversations, the stranger those conversations will become. And so our work in Catholic rural life, as I said, is to bring God's revelation into those places where it seems like nothing is needed. I say not just any God. Just last week, I think the Sunday readings, when Paul and Barnabas go into Lystra and someone is healed, the crowd reacts naturally. And they think, holy smokes, Zeus and Hermes are here. This is fantastic. They think it's Zeus and Hermes. They're not surprised that a god would show up and do something godlike. They think it's Zeus and Hermes, and they're going to slaughter a bull, and a riot breaks out. And you imagine, you know, I don't know if people think you're Zeus and Hermes in your catechism classes, but you can imagine the chaos that ensues. And Paul and Barnabas have to tamp it back. Say, we're just ordinary folk. We're not Zeus and Hermes. And then you get this beautiful little proto-gospel. The gospel isn't out yet. Church is working on its message. And notice what Paul and Barnabas say. You should turn to the living God who made heaven and earth. You should turn to the living God who made heaven and earth. Back to that logos, back to that theology of creation. Jesus isn't just any God. He's connected to those through whom all things, the one through whom all things were made. And then they go on. He, God, did not leave himself without witness, for he gave you rains and fruitful seasons and filled you with nourishment and gladness for your hearts. In other words, God's active in his creation. We know this already. No one in the crowd debates that. There's just a self-evident providential care for humans when we look at the world of agriculture. We get beautiful bounty from the earth and have for millennia. And this is because God is at work in the created order, present in the created order, and it's that God who comes into the person of Jesus. So we can't be professing the person of Jesus and have this disdain for ecological concerns. Something's gone wrong in your Christology, and I invite you to maybe reflect on that. Okay, I hope you brought your thinking caps. Here's a little bit of technical speak. Now, I know it's afternoon. I know I'm the second speaker. I know you had lunch. So if you nod off and start looking at your phone, that's just going to make me feel at home. So I appreciate it. I appreciate that home-like atmosphere some of you are creating. So let's read this down. And this is available in the back on a sheet of paper, so you don't have to, there'll be no quiz. Okay, the left side of the column, before the fall, not the season, I mean original sin, before the fall, all the way down, creation, lower creation, human beings, and our right relationships. Before the fall, before original sin, all creation reflects the wisdom of God, the logos of God. Everybody's familiar with the bliss that Adam and Eve experienced before the fall. Going down that column, before the fall, humans enjoyed the gifts. Now, this is going way back. Some of the silver-haired will remember this. The preternatural gifts of immortality, integrity, harmony with creatures. We don't have to go into the vocabulary there. Human beings enjoyed special graces from God that made them immortal, gave them the immortality. It gave them integrity. What does that mean? It means they didn't experience a lot of stress. They didn't, wonder what life was about. They know what life is about. They're there in the Garden of Eden, living under the provident care of the Creator. They live in harmony with each other. Go figure. Husband and wives. I've been married, 38 years now? Still a joyful mystery. Right? Still very much a joyful mystery. Some days more mystery than joyful. She's not here, so I can. But before the fall, Adam and Eve had a simpatico that we can only long for in our marriages, right? And they freely participated in the wisdom of the cosmos. They freely participated in the divine arrangement of things. They lived in harmony with the Creator. They lived in harmony with themselves, others, and other creatures. Life was pretty darn good. After the fall, here we go, folks. This is the price of admission here. Creation itself continues to reflect the wisdom of God. Creation remains his witness. Here's a thesis that's starting to fall through the cracks in Catholic imaginations, and I'll just stare at the back room in case you think I'm talking about you. A thesis that's falling through the cracks. It really was the reformers, 15th, 16th century, that started drawing lower creation into the drama of the fall, into the drama of original sin. Lower creation started to get swept up. Prior to that, lower creation was a non-combatant in the drama of the fall. Lower creation, I mean bugs and bunnies and bees and bushes, right? And one of the things I think that's happening in our Catholic imagination, Dr. Nolan captured a lot, that business mindset sort of creeping in, but I think there's a little bit of a theological drift going on where lower creation starts to, we understand it as somehow broken, as somehow caught up in a wickedness, somehow caught up in a sinfulness. And so our theological imagination starts to dismiss nature as one of the primary ways God communicates his presence to us. One of the primary ways that the Logos invites himself into friendship is in the splendor and in beauty of the created order. After the fall, we lose the gifts. We lose the preternatural gifts. We're no longer immortal. I don't experience integrity with any degree of consistency. That joyful mystery among the spouses, not so much. Human nature is wounded, not destroyed. And then here's the critical position after the fall. We live disordered lives within an ordered cosmos. What's wrong with the world? Me. I'm what's wrong with the world, to borrow from Chesterton. We live disordered lives within an ordered cosmos. You can imagine what this would do to the understanding of agriculture if I thought I was walking out into a field that already participates in a divinely arranged cosmos. So many of us walk out into the starry heavens thinking it's a blank slate, one darn thing after another, a tale full of sound and fury signifying nothing. That's never been the case for our Catholic imagination. We're walking out into the divine jeweler's shop. And so agriculture in the medieval tradition was considered an ars cooperativa, a cooperative art. It was like sailing. They would match agriculture and sailing, where the sailor would cooperate with the seas and the currents to advance the ship wherever he wanted to go. And ars cooperativa was like teaching, when the teacher would cooperate with the natural desire to know on the part of the student. You've all tried to teach someone who isn't interested in learning. You might irritate them, but you're not going to teach them. And so the farmer walks out into the field that's already brimming with meaning, already thick with intelligibility, already flush with light, already immersed in this providential divine arrangement. It doesn't mean there's not work to do. We are, after all, the fall. But the light, the objects, come from the created things. This is St. Thomas, just for a minute, no extra charge for this. It's very popular to describe the search for wisdom. What is learning? It's me holding a candle, and there I go out into the dark universe, and now I'm learning about this, and I'm going to go over there and learn about that, and I'm going to learn about this, because I've got the candle of learning and wisdom, and I'm going to go out. For St. Thomas, it's exactly the opposite. The world is thick with light. Objects are so brimming with intelligibility. I'm the one that's the dumbest kid in the class. My vision is blurred because of sin and because of natural human weakness. St. Thomas says explicitly in his commentary on the Creed, he says the human intellect isn't capable of grasping the essence of a single fly because the thing is so dense with meaning, so complex. So a certain docility to the created order. Yes, we have to exercise dominion, but dominion would be a lordly posture. And we have some talking points in Genesis about what a lordly posture looks like. And before you get out there and do something, maybe you just pause and behold it as good. Indeed, very good. That's the dominion. That's the godly posture. Okay, I'll let you go here. So we asked some questions of all those folks that go to our retreats. We asked the questions that our seminarians participate in. Frankly, we ask these kinds of questions any chance we get. Every corner of the earth. Jim and I and others have been working so hard to advance the vision that we're talking about here in Catholic rural life. And I offer these. Some of you are chapter folks. These might be nice prompts for an evening of conversation. Take one of them or take all of them. Little evening of conversation in your chapters. Am I docile to the presence of Christ in creation? Am I really going to allow the Lord to speak to me? Did you see this day? I know we're inside, but did you walk across that quad? Holy smokes, pinch me. All right. You should have taken just a moment to say, glory be to God for dappled things. Just a moment to say, thank you, thank you, thank you. Frankly, my deepest aspiration is that I would foster in my students and you a profound love of the person of Christ and be docile to the so many ways he sends an invitation of friendship, including this glorious day. That the splendor of creation is one of the ways that God speaks to us. The farmers know this instinctively. I think maybe what's happening is you might get talked out of that being a particularly faithful. Well, that's because you have biological origins, or the millennia of sort of, you're these humans that have evolved, and that's why you're. The beauty and the splendor of creation is the Logos inviting you to conversation. The next time you're caught up by the starry heavens, the next time you see your beautiful fields also nicely manicured, and the sun is going down, and just for a second you think life is good. That's not just you eating well and getting your fiber in and exercising. That's the Logos inviting you to a conversation. One of the things I love about that rural setting is how often that conversation is just readily available. That's the Christ veiled in creation. And Dr. Nolan spoke so eloquently. That's the same Christ that's offered in the Eucharist. One and the same. Do I see my work as a cooperation with God, and ars cooperativa? Do I know the church's teachings concerning Christ and his creation? Maybe one of your chapters could pick one of those USCCB texts. Do I know the social teachings of the church concerning the dignity of the agricultural worker? There's a nice document out back for your reading. Do I understand my responsibilities as a follower of Christ to care for his creation? We kind of got ourselves a little sideways on this. Somehow we got all bristly about talk of care of creation. That is so alien to our Catholic posture before the world. That's just so alien. You say, that just sounds like PBS, and I'm EWTN, right? I say, God bless you. I get it. I understand. In fact, the problem is, if we don't step into the space and really lift our hearts to turn to the Creator, PBS will do it for us. And Ken Burns, not the New Testament, will be your manual for understanding the national parks. By the way, we were the only seminary in the world that celebrated the 40th anniversary of the founding of the national parks. I was pretty proud of that, just for this very reason, for some of these themes. Is my, let's see. Do I see the Eucharist as a crowning achievement of all my efforts? We did not rehearse our talks, but Dr. Nolan teed that up nicely. Is my own life a witness to joy in creation and simplicity of lifestyle? That's a challenging one. We cannot be berating farmers for how they produce their food without challenging how we consume it. The fact is, we've got ourselves into these habits of production because we've got ourselves into these habits of consumption. And it's simply unfair to expect the farmer to abandon his livelihood because of my principled objections to his practices when I'm running off and buying a cubic yard of the cheapest food I can find. That's not going to work. Here I would invite if I could, inspire, maybe encourage, whatever the word is, maybe just suggest and then run away. If the bishops could speak a little bit about the ethics of consumption. There's extraordinary amount of volume in the Catholic social tradition about the ethics of production. I think the ethics of consumption could really use some reflection, prayerful reflection. How am I using my resources, and how am I spending my resources? I guarantee you, if we don't like the practice and we don't consume it, that the production will stop overnight. No extra charge for that. Okay. I love sarcasm, if you haven't noticed. I love it. It's not very good for me, but I do love it. And I'm just so happy for the work we do. So grateful, again, for the work we do. So happy to be here. Here's another freebie I just want to share. This is for maybe the more theologically trained, whoever you may be. It's popular to see that prologue of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, right? It's popular among scripture scholars to suggest that's the Greek influence coming in. This is the Logos. The Greeks were into Logos. The gospel is starting to spread beyond Jerusalem. You're probably familiar with some of the New Testament studies. This is the Greek philosophical tradition working its way into the New Testament. And this is John the genius syncretist weaving together the gospel of Jesus and the Greek philosophical tradition. If you knew what the Greeks thought about the Logos, they wouldn't see him veiled in Jesus. So where did this come from? Well, it says in that same gospel, from that day on, the disciple took her into his home. When John is writing his gospel, he has Mary at his coffee table. He has Mary at his coffee table. Reading that tradition rightly, I think I am, Mary would be free from original sin. She would have been able to read in creation the presence of the Logos. More than anyone, Mary would know that it's the Logos veiled in creation because she's free from original sin. So she would walk out into her fields. She would walk out under that starry heavens. She would walk out into this great earth that God's rolled out for us just this very day. And she would know more than anyone why you would want to say, glory be to God for dappled things. Thank you.